The pedal hit the floor. Nothing. No resistance. Just empty space where the brake should have been. I slammed my foot down again. Harder this time. Panic clawing at my throat. My SUV didn't slow down. Instead, it picked up speed, hurtling toward the barrier at 80 miles an hour. The speedometer climbed. The ocean churned hundreds of feet below. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, lighting up with a text from my sister. Sabrina, are you there yet? We're waiting to pop the champagne. The smiley face emoji glared at me. And in that split second, as the guardrail rushed up to meet me, I realized two things. I was about to die, and my family was celebrating it. Before I tell you what happened when that car hit the guardrail, drop a comment below. Where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? I want to know who is with me on this journey. The world turned upside down. Metal screamed against metal. A sound like a dying animal that vibrated in my teeth. The guardrail gave way with a sickening crunch. And then there was only air. Gravity pinned me against my seatbelt as the sky and the ocean swapped places in a dizzying blur. I waited for the final impact. The one that would turn me into a memory. But it didn't come. Instead, there was a violent series of thuds. The screech of tearing branches. And then a sudden, jarring halt. I opened my eyes. My SUV was dangling at a 45-degree angle, caught in a dense thicket of ancient scrub pines growing out of the cliffside, 10 feet lower. And I would have been in the Atlantic. I unbuckled my seatbelt, ignoring the glass that bit into my palms, and crawled out the shattered window. The cold Rhode Island wind hit my face, stinging the gash on my forehead. Blood trickled into my eye, warm and sticky. I wiped it away with the back of my hand and looked up at the road. I was alive, and I was furious. By the time the tow truck arrived, I was sitting on a rock, pressing a rag against my head. The driver, a burly man named Miller, hooked up the winch. He spent 2 minutes under the chassis before he crawled back out. His face was the color of old ash. He didn't say a word. He just motioned for me to look. I crouched down, ignoring the dizziness. He shined his flashlight on the undercarriage. The brake line hadn't burst. It hadn't rusted. It was severed. A clean, bright cut made by wire cutters. I stared at that cut. And suddenly, the pieces of my life clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Most people would be in shock. They would be asking, how could my family do this? But I wasn't asking that. Because this wasn't an isolated incident. This was just the graduation ceremony. I remembered the winter I was 12. A blizzard had buried Newport in 3 feet of snow. The boarding school dorms were closing for the holidays. Every other parent was lined up in their Range Rovers. I waited on the curb for 6 hours. When I finally used the dorm mother's phone to call home, my mother, Cynthia, laughed. She said, "Oh, Misa, we're in Aspen. We thought you'd enjoy the quiet time alone." They left a 12-year-old girl in an empty, unheated dorm for 2 weeks. When they came back, they didn't apologize. They made jokes about my resilience. That is the trap of normalized cruelty. They don't start with murder. They start by making you invisible. They start by teaching you that your pain is a punchline and your safety is optional. They condition you to accept the cold so that when they finally decide to freeze you to death, it doesn't feel like a crime. It just feels like Tuesday. They thought they had broken me back then. They thought I was the same little girl who cried in the empty dorm. They were wrong. The cold didn't break me. It preserved me. And today, it was going to fuel me. The paramedic tried to guide me toward the ambulance. "Ma'am, you need a CT scan. You have a head injury." I pulled my arm away. "I don't have time for a hospital," I said, my voice sounding strange and guttural to my own ears. "I have a family reunion to attend." I wrapped the bandage tighter around my head, letting the blood seep through just enough to look like a nightmare walking. I didn't want to be cleaned up. I wanted them to see the blood. I wanted them to smell the gasoline. I climbed into the passenger seat of the tow truck. "Take me to Highcliffe Manor," I told Miller, "and don't stop at the gate." The heavy oak doors of Highcliffe Manor were unlocked. They always were. Why lock the doors when you own the town? I limped through the foyer, leaving a trail of red droplets on the pristine white marble. The house smelled of lilies and lemon polish, the scent of a funeral disguised as a celebration. I stopped outside the double doors of the dining room. I didn't barge in immediately. I needed to hear it. I needed to know exactly who they were when they thought I was gone. To the future. Sabrina's voice floated through the wood, light and airy, and to trimming the fat. I heard the delicate chime of crystal flutes clinking together. My sister was drinking champagne. I was supposed to be dead at the bottom of a cliff, broken on the rocks. And she was drinking vintage Dom Perignon. It's for the best. My mother, Cynthia, added. Her tone was dismissive, the way one talks about a stained rug that had finally been thrown out. Misa was always so unstable. Driving on those cliffs, she was bound to have an accident eventually. It's tragic. Of course. But she was never reliable. We couldn't trust the estate to someone who can't even show up on time. Douglas, pour more wine, Cynthia commanded. My father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, the man who I now knew had held the flashlight while my sister cut my brake lines, mumbled something I couldn't catch, but I heard the sound of liquid pouring. He was drinking, too. He was washing down his guilt with expensive alcohol. Mr. Blackwood, Sabrina said, her voice sharpening with impatience. Stop looking at your watch. She isn't coming. We all know she isn't coming. Read the will. I suppose you're right, the lawyer stammered. I could hear the rustle of heavy paper. Given Misa's absence, and the circumstances, we will proceed with the standard distribution as outlined in the primary document. The estate is valued at $100 million. The distribution stands at 90% for the immediate family, Cynthia, Douglas, and Sabrina, and 10% to be held in trust for Misa. Should she survive. 10%. Sabrina scoffed. That's generous. She doesn't deserve a dime after putting us through this waiting game. Can we just sign the papers? I have a party to host tonight. I rested my bloody hand on the cold brass handle of the door. My head was throbbing, a rhythmic drumbeat of pain that matched the pounding of my heart. But my hands were steady. They thought they had won. They thought the silence from the cliff meant victory. They didn't know that the silence was just me. Catching my breath, I tightened my grip on the handle. I wasn't going to knock. I slammed the double doors open. The sound was like a thunderclap in the quiet room. The heavy oak panels hit the walls and shuddered. I stepped inside. I didn't say a word. I just let them look at me. I was a nightmare made flesh. The white bandage around my head was soaked through with fresh red blood. My clothes were torn, exposing scraped skin and bruises that were already darkening. I smelled of gasoline, burnt rubber, and the sea. I limped forward, favoring my left leg, my boots leaving faint, dirty prints on the Persian rug. The room froze. It was as if I had sucked all the oxygen out of the air. Sabrina dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot, splashing vintage wine across the hem of her white dress. Her mouth hung open, her eyes wide and terrified. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. Cynthia gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Douglas just stared, his face draining of color until he looked like a corpse himself. Even the lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, froze mid-sentence, his papers trembling in his hands. You look disappointed, Sabrina, I said, my voice low and raspy. Or were you expecting a coroner's report instead of a sister? I walked to the table. I didn't wait for an invitation. I pulled out the heavy chair at the head of the table, the one usually reserved for guests of honor, and sat down. Every movement hurt, but I didn't let it show. I moved with cold, mechanical precision. Misa, Cynthia whispered, her voice trembling. We thought. You thought I was dead, I finished for her. I know. I got your text. Sabrina. Are you there yet? You were timing it? Weren't you calculating exactly when I'd hit the curve? No, Sabrina stammered, taking a step back. I was just checking in. Checking in, I repeated flatly, checking to see if the brakes failed on schedule. Brakes. Douglas choked out the word. He looked like he was going to be sick. What? What happened? Don't play dumb. Dad, I said, turning my gaze on him. It doesn't suit you. You held the flashlight. Remember. I looked around the table at the untouched food, the expensive wine, the decorations. They had prepared a feast for my funeral. Mr. Blackwood, I said, turning to the lawyer. I believe you were in the middle of something. Please. Continue. I wouldn't want to interrupt the reading of my own exclusion. Ms. Misa. The lawyer stuttered, clearly out of his depth. Perhaps we should call a doctor. You're injured. I don't need a doctor, I said. I need you to read the will. Specifically, the part where my family inherits 90% of everything. Read it. The lawyer cleared his throat, nervously. Yes. Well, as I was saying, the primary distribution allocates 90% of the estate to Cynthia, Douglas, and Sabrina. The remaining 10% is held in trust for Misa. Sabrina let out a breath, a tiny, hysterical giggle escaping her lips. See, she said, her voice shrill. It doesn't matter. You're alive. Fine. But you still lose. We still win. 90%. Misa. You get scraps. She smirked, her confidence returning now that she thought the money was safe. She thought the game was over. She thought survival was my only victory. I leaned back in the chair and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who has already lit the fuse. Is that so? I asked softly. Mr. Blackwood. Before we sign anything, I have a little addition to the proceedings. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I reached into the pocket of my torn jeans, my fingers brushing against the cold metal that was about to end their lives as they knew them. I pulled out a small, silver, USB drive. It was stained with a smear of my own blood. What is that? Cynthia demanded, her voice sharp. We are done here. Misa, sign the papers or leave. I ignored her. I stood up, wincing as my bruised leg took my weight, and walked to the massive 85-inch television mounted on the wall. It was the centerpiece of the room, usually used for displaying family vacation photos, the ones I was never invited to. Today, it was going to show a different kind of home movie. I plugged the drive in and pressed play. The screen lit up with crystal-clear footage from the Manor garage. Time-stamped 1:1:4:2 p.m. The night before. Two figures crouched beneath my SUV, one holding a flashlight on the rear axle, the other gripping red-handled wire cutters. Hold it steady. Dad, Sabrina's voice said calmly. If I cut it just right, it won't snap until the curve. Just hurry, Douglas replied nervously. Your mother says she's leaving in 10 minutes. Sabrina laughed. By tomorrow? Misa's gone. Goodbye, Cinderella sister. I paused the video on Sabrina's smiling face. The room fell silent. Douglas gripped the table. Cynthia froze. Sabrina stared at me, hollow-eyed. You trapped us, she whispered. I didn't trap you, I said. I just turned on the lights. I informed them the video had already been uploaded to the cloud and sent to my attorney, the district attorney, and the police chief, who stepped inside on cue with two officers. Douglas Blackwood, Sabrina Blackwood, Cynthia Blackwood. Stand up. Now. Cynthia tried to call it a prank. I cut her off, because snap on the curve sounded very intentional. As the officers moved in, Sabrina lunged for a knife, screaming that I ruined everything. I sidestepped. She slipped on spilled champagne, crashed into the table. and cut her own arm as the knife flew from her hand. Instantly, she collapsed into hysterics. "Help! She attacked me!" Cynthia joined in, accusing me of a breakdown. It would have worked if the police hadn't just watched her cut my brake lines. "Enough," Chief Miller said. "We saw the video. The show's over." As they restrained Sabrina, the family lawyer stepped forward. "There is one final matter," he said, opening a binder. "The integrity clause. Arthur's greed trap. Under the Slayer rule, any beneficiary who attempts to kill another forfeits their inheritance." Douglas whispered. "What does that mean?" "It means the 90% left to Cynthia, Douglas, and Sabrina is forfeited." Sabrina choked. "Then who gets it?" The lawyer turned to me. "The victim. Congratulations, Misa. You inherit everything." Sabrina's scream was raw, inhuman. 6 months later, Highcliffe Manor was no longer a tomb. It was being rebuilt into a sanctuary. I kept my city apartment. The manor wasn't my home, it was my legacy. Standing on the balcony, I watched the ocean crash below, my wrecked SUV still resting on the rocks as a reminder. Family isn't blood. Family is conduct. Family doesn't cut your brakes. I poured out a bottle of champagne for my grandfather and walked back inside. The road ahead was finally open.